Hello, my name is Steven, and today I'm going to show you how to do some basic keyframe animation in Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, even in the age of computers, animation can be a very labor-intensive process, but keyframes can help simplify everything. The basic idea is that instead of having you animate each individual frame by hand yourself, you pick a few important frames, some keyframes to animate, and then you let the software fill in the gaps for you. Today, I'm going to use keyframes to move an image across the screen, but the same basic principles apply no matter what kind of animation you want to do. This is a pretty basic topic as far as animation goes, but we are working in Adobe Premiere Pro, so there are a few things you're going to have to know before we get started. You should know how to navigate the Premiere interface, and by that I just mean you should know where the bin, the timeline, the source monitor, and the program monitor are. We won't get too much deeper than that. You should know how to create a new project and how to create a new sequence in the project. You should be able to add media both to your project bin and to your timeline. And we're only going to touch on this very briefly, but you should also know how to shorten or lengthen a clip with the trim tool, but I'll show you how to do that. Once you have these basic skills down, you're ready for the lesson. So let's get to it. Here I have a Premiere project, and I've already added a video clip and an image file to my bin. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to create a sequence to build this animation in. Now here's a shortcut for you. If you have a video file in your bin and you want to create a sequence that has the exact same video settings as the video file, you can click and drag the video file straight from the bin into the timeline, and Premiere will create the sequence for you. Now be careful, this is only useful when you want the sequence to have the same settings as the video. If the sequence is going to have different settings, you need to create it the old way with the new sequence command. So here I have a video of a man looking from one side of the screen to the other. It's a short video, kind of silly. But this is a good time to talk about some keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to use to navigate the timeline. It's mostly the arrow keys plus the space button. If I hit the up arrow key, my playhead will move to the in point of the clip that I'm on. And if I hit the down key, the playhead will move to the out point. Notice this. The out point is actually one frame past the last frame of the video, which in this case gives me black space because I don't have any more clips on the timeline. The left and right arrow keys will move through the video one frame at a time. And the space key will either play the video, or if it's already playing, pause it. Back to the beginning here. Okay, so I also have this image of a cartoon bee that I want to include in my video, and I can put that into the timeline just directly on top of the video clip that's already there. Now you'll notice that by default, when you add a static image to the timeline, Premiere gives it a duration of 5 seconds. That's pretty close to the entire length of the video that I'm working with here, but still I want to make sure that B doesn't miraculously disappear at some point. So I'm going to extend this image clip out a little bit. If I hover my mouse down at the end of the clip, you'll see it turns into the red trim tool. So I can click that and just drag it out just to make sure that the image lasts just as long as the video does. My goal here is to move the bee across the screen as if the man is looking at it. I'm going to be doing all of my work in the Effect Controls panel. Now, every object that you put into the timeline has its own Effect Controls panel. To bring up the Effect Control panel for the bee, I'm going to double-click the bee clip in the timeline. That loads the bee into the source monitor over here. And at the top of the source monitor, there's a panel called Effect Controls. So I'm going to click on that. You see here there are a lot of properties of the clip listed. The position, scale, rotation, anti-flicker, all of these things can be adjusted. And if you adjust them multiple times over the course of the video with keyframes, that's basically animation in a nutshell. the first thing I want to do with the B is I want to shrink it down. It's a little too big for what I want to do with it. You notice there is a property here called scale, and it's measured in percentage. This is how I'm going to change the size of the B. If I put my mouse over this value here, you see it turns into a slider. I can click and move that back and forth to change the value, or I can just click on the number itself and type a new value in. I'm going to change the size of the B to about a quarter of what it was when we started. It's a pretty good size for what I'm going to do with it. So I want to move the B across the screen, which means I don't want it starting here in the middle, so I'm going to have to change its position. You see there are two values here next to the position property. The first one is for the horizontal position, and the second one is for the vertical position. Both of these values are measured in pixels. If you're curious, they measure from the anchor point of the image, which we're not going to talk about too much, but it's basically the center. It's going to measure from the anchor point of the image. The horizontal value is going to measure the distance from the anchor point to the left edge of the frame, and the vertical measurement is going to measure from the anchor point to the top of the frame. We don't really need to know all that. I don't need to be too precise for this lesson. All I need to know is that if I increase the horizontal position, the B moves to the right, and if I increase the vertical position, the B moves down. So I want to have the B move from the left side of the screen to the right side, so I'm going to move it over to the left side and up a bit from where I have it. It's a good starting point. If I play the video right now, the B doesn't move. It's because there's no keyframes. I haven't created any animation yet. So let's get to that. Let me go back to the beginning of the clip here with the up arrow key. Now, there is an icon next to the position property that looks like a little stopwatch. In fact, there's a stopwatch icon next to all of these properties. This, if you hold your mouse over it, you'll see this is the animation toggle. When you turn this on, you're going to do two things. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to turn on animation. That means that the property that we turn on will now be available to change over the course of the video. So let me turn that on. The second thing it does is it creates your first keyframe for you. Now, on the right side of the source monitor here up in the Effect Controls panel, you'll see a little miniature version of the timeline. And on this timeline, everywhere you have a keyframe, you'll see a little diamond pop up. Actually, this first keyframe that we created, we're only seeing half the diamond. That's because it's at the very first frame of the video. There are a couple controls here next to the position property that are important. There are these two little arrows that will navigate backward and forward through your keyframes. I only have one at the moment, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then this button in the center will add a keyframe if there isn't one where your playhead is sitting, or it'll delete a keyframe if there is one. Although the truth is, most of the keyframes you create, you're not going to create with that button. Let me show you what I mean. Now that I have animation turned on for the position property, if I move anywhere else in the video and I change the position value, I will create a new keyframe. So let's say that I go out here to the end of the video and I move, because I want the B to fly across the screen. So I go out here to the end of the video and I'll move the B to the other side of the screen. You'll see that that created, up here in the mini timeline, it created a new keyframe. And now I can use the keyframe navigation buttons to go back and forth between them. So what does that look like? So I gave the software two keyframes to look at, and this software filled in the gaps in between. And that's technically animation, but it's not very interesting. And what's worse is I didn't do very much keyframing. So I'm going to sort of back up here, and I'm going to use, let me go to that second keyframe. Just to simplify things, I'm going to delete my last keyframe and start over. So I use the keyframe navigation buttons to go to that second keyframe that I created, and then I'm going to use this button in the middle to remove it. Now that, of course, removes the values that created the keyframe to begin with. So let's go back to the beginning here. This time, I'm going to take a look at the man's face, and I'm going to try to move the bee in a way that makes sense with the man's eye lines. If you notice at the beginning of the video here, the man's not even looking toward the bee. So I'm going to do something kind of neat here. Back to the first keyframe. I'm going to move the bee completely off frame to the left. Now remember that Premiere is pretty smart. Just because I can't see the bee anymore doesn't mean the Premiere has lost track of it. Premiere knows exactly how many pixels that image is sitting off the side of the screen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move through the video to a point where the man is looking toward the bee, and I'm going to bring the bee back on the screen. Let's move it right about there. Now you notice, again, not to belabor the point, but changing the position of the bee created a new keyframe. So now I'm going to move a little farther in the video to where he's looking in the other direction, and I'll put the bee in a place that makes sense on the right side of the screen. Another keyframe just got created because I changed the position. Finally, you'll notice that the man ends up looking straight forward again by the end of the video. So I'm going to, at the end of the video, let's go to the last frame of the video here. I'm going to move the bee completely off screen to the right. So let's take a look at what we have now. That's not so bad. The bee's speed changes a little bit as he goes across the screen, but I'm okay with that. I think it gives it sort of an organic feel. What doesn't feel organic to me is the fact that the bee doesn't move up and down at all across its whole trip. But I can fix that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to scrub through the timeline and just kind of sprinkle in some extra keyframes where I adjust the bee's vertical position. Remember that the horizontal position has already been adjusted, so I don't need to mess with that. I'm just going to fiddle with the vertical part. And there's no real science to this part. As with most editing tasks, you just kind of have to watch the video over and over and then trust your gut. So, here we go. I'm just going to move in some. I'm trying not to make any changes that seem too big. I don't want him teleporting around the screen. Just a few. Go up after here. Again, just sort of working by feel here. And there we go. So let's take a look at it from the beginning. Alright, that's not too shabby. If it seems a little jerky for you, the reason for that is that Premiere is basically moving the bee along straight lines between all of those keyframes. Full disclosure, there is a more elegant solution to this issue called motion paths, but I'm trying to keep things simple right now. So for the moment, if you want the bee's movement to look a little more smooth, then all you have to do is add in more keyframes. The more keyframes you put in, the smoother the curves will look. So let's reiterate. I'm going to take another look at these keyframe controls. Let's say that at some point in the video, I accidentally moved the bee way off path, and I didn't notice at the time. What would that look like? Oh, okay. So yeah, there's that teleport that I was talking about, right? To get rid of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate with these keyframe navigation buttons. I'm going to move back through the keyframes and find the one where the bee goes off his track. There it is. Yeah. All the way down to the bottom of the screen. And then I can use this button in the center to remove that keyframe. And you'll notice the rest of the keyframes are untouched. So, that covers the basics of keyframe animation in Adobe Premiere Pro. To recap, I enabled animation by clicking the toggle animation stopwatch on the property that I wanted to change, and that created my first keyframe. Then I went throughout the video and made changes to that property intermittently across the length of the video, and that created the rest of the keyframes so that Premiere could fill in the gaps in between them. That's really the entire gist of the process. If you don't see the power of keyframes just yet though, remember, the only thing I've been adjusting so far has been the position, but there are animation toggles on every one of these properties. So if I wanted to, I could animate the scale and the rotation and even the opacity. So I could have that be grow and shrink and spin and even fade in and out over the course of the video using the same process that I've been using to move it. Let me show you what that would look like. And that's the same process, just animating opacity and rotation and scale instead of position. And also, as you start to add extra effects onto your clips, you'll see each one of those has its own little stopwatch as well, which means you can animate any effect that you put on anything in your timeline. So once you get the hang of keyframes, you're not just going to be adding one tool to your Adobe Premiere Pro toolset, you're actually going to be adding a whole family of them. So, thanks for joining me on this lesson, and happy animating.